The night was warm. The street was quiet. But my world was about to explode. Karen, the HOA president, stood in front of my house. Her finger was shaking, her voice sharp like a knife, and then she screamed at the officers beside her. "He's dangerous. Take the shot." I froze. My daughter cried, and the police reached for their guns. But what happened next? No one in this neighborhood was ready for. Welcome back to HOA Chaos, the place where suburban secrets are never safe. I'm Mark, a homeowner in a picture-perfect neighborhood. At least that's what it looked like from the outside. I work from home. I mow my lawn. I pay my dues, but I had no idea the HOA here was more like a kingdom, and Karen was the queen. This is the story of how one woman's power trip almost destroyed me, until the truth came out. The story began on a street that looked normal. Houses lined up like soldiers, grass trimmed short, mailboxes standing straight, a place that promised peace, order, safety. But behind those white fences and welcome mats was something darker. My name is Mark. I had just moved into this neighborhood with my daughter. I wanted quiet. I wanted safety. I wanted a place to start fresh. I work from home. Nothing fancy. Just a regular guy trying to live a simple life. And at first, it all looked perfect. Neighbors waved when we moved in. Kids rode bikes down the cul-de-sac. Sprinklers hissed in the morning. It was the image of the American dream. But dreams, sometimes, are illusions. And in this neighborhood, the dream had a gatekeeper. Her name was Karen. She was the HOA president, tall, blonde, always dressed sharp. And she had this way of looking at you that made you feel small, like she was measuring every move you made, deciding if you belonged. The first time I met her, she smiled, but her eyes never did. She walked up to me holding a clipboard, introduced herself as the one who keeps this neighborhood perfect, and then she gave me a stack of rules, pages and pages of rules, the color of curtains allowed, the height of grass, even the type of flowers in the garden. I laughed nervously, thought she was joking, but she wasn't. At first, I tried to follow the rules. I kept my lawn short. I parked exactly where the lines allowed. But then one evening, my daughter drew chalk flowers on the sidewalk. Just flowers, pink and blue and yellow. She was smiling, laughing, enjoying a simple summer evening, and that's when Karen appeared. She marched over like the sidewalk was her property, looked down at the chalk, then at me. "This is against HOA policy," she said. Her tone was sharp, like a teacher scolding a child. I thought she was kidding. "Come on, it's just chalk. It'll wash away with the rain," I told her. But she didn't blink. She wrote something down on her clipboard, and the next morning, I had my first fine, $50, for chalk drawings on concrete. I paid it, thinking maybe it was just a warning. Maybe it would end there. But it didn't, because once Karen decided you were a problem, you were always a problem. Next week, I got a letter for leaving my trash bin out too long, another fine. Then a notice about a non-approved garden decoration. It was a bird feeder my daughter had picked out. Karen said it didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. It wasn't about the rules anymore, it was about control. She wanted to remind me, every day, that she had power. At night I would see her walking past our house, taking photos. I could feel her eyes even when I wasn't looking. The neighbors whispered. Some of them had stories too, but no one stood up to her, because everyone feared the fines, the letters, the threats. And then, one summer evening, everything changed. I was mowing the lawn. My daughter was sitting on the porch, sipping lemonade. That's when I heard shouting. Karen again. Wall. King fast, phone in her hand. She was calling the police. I thought maybe it was about another neighbor. Maybe she had found a mailbox an inch too tall. But no, this time, it was about me. She stood in front of my house, pointing straight at me, and when the officers arrived, she didn't hold back. "He's dangerous," she said, her voice loud enough for the whole street. "He's a threat to this neighborhood." I froze. The police looked at me, then at her, and then I heard the words that turned my blood cold. Karen screamed, "Take the shot." My daughter grabbed my arm. Tears in her eyes, I felt my chest tighten. Was this really happening? Over chalk. over trash bins, over a bird feeder. But here's the thing. Karen didn't know I had cameras. Cameras that recorded every fine, every threat, every lie. And that's where this story truly begins. Because what I did with those recordings changed everything. The police stood there, their hands near their belts, eyes moving between me and Karen. I kept my voice calm, slow. I'm unarmed. I'm not dangerous. I just live here with my daughter. One of the officers squinted, looking at my lawn, then at the porch where my daughter sat. I could see his doubt. But Karen didn't stop. She stepped closer to them, pointing again. He's unstable. He doesn't respect the community rules. He could snap any moment. It was almost comical. She was turning chalk flowers and bird feeders into a national emergency. But in that moment, it wasn't funny. Because when the word dangerous is shouted at a man, with cops standing nearby, anything can happen. I could feel my daughter's grip on my arm, her nails digging into my skin. She whispered, "Daddy, please don't let them hurt you." And that broke something inside me. I knew I couldn't just survive this moment. I had to end it once and for all. What Karen didn't know was that my cameras had been rolling for months. Not just security cameras outside, but a small camera inside the mailbox, one hidden near the porch light, another facing the yard. I had captured every note she stuffed into my box, every time she took photos of my house, every time she crossed the line, even the night she stood on my driveway yelling to herself about how this neighborhood would be perfect if he just left. So as the officer stood there, I pulled out my phone, I opened the app, tapped the video folder, and pressed play. Her voice filled the air. The recording showed her pointing at my house days earlier, saying, "I'll get rid of him, one way or another." It showed her threatening me with fines, threatening me with eviction, threatening me with shame. The cops froze. Karen's face turned pale. She tried to laugh it off, said I was editing videos. But the timestamps were clear. The footage was raw, real, undeniable. The officer with the radio leaned back, whispered something to his partner, and then they both turned to Karen. "Ma'am, you need to calm down." Those words, for the first time, weren't aimed at me. They were aimed at her. But Karen wasn't done. She never quit. She never admitted defeat. She raised her voice again. "You don't understand. He's dangerous. He's corrupting this neighborhood. He's spreading lies." Her face was red now, her hands shaking, her voice cracking. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The officers stepped between us. One of them told me to stay inside with my daughter. The other warned Karen that false reports could lead to charges. And then, just like that, the flashing lights faded as the police drove off. But I knew this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't the kind of person to back down after humiliation. No, this was only the beginning of something bigger. That night, I sat at my desk, scrolling through the footage again. Every file was another weapon, another piece of truth. I started making copies, uploading them to drives, saving them to clouds. If Karen W. wanted a war, I was going to be ready the next morning. It began, a new letter in my mailbox. This time, not a fine, but a notice of community violation review. According to Karen, my house was being considered for forced compliance action. What did that mean? It meant she wanted me dragged into an HOA hearing, in front of the entire board, her chance to humiliate me publicly, her chance to prove she still had power, and I knew exactly what I had to do. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. I walked into the clubhouse with my daughter holding my hand. The room was filled with neighbors, whispers floating like smoke. Some glared at me, others looked down, a few offered faint smiles, and at the center of it all was Karen, sitting tall, arms folded, that same cold smile on her face. She opened the meeting with a speech about community safety, about dangerous influences, about how one homeowner was disrespecting everything we stand for. Her words dripped like poison, and when she finished, all eyes turned to me. I stood slowly, holding a folder in my hand. I spoke soft at first, then louder. "I love this neighborhood. I mow my lawn. I pay my dues. I follow the rules." I paused, looked straight at Karen. "But what I don't follow is bullying. Then I pulled out the screen. I connected it to the projector and hit play. The room filled with her voice again, the threats, the lies. The moment she told the police to take the shot, gasps echoed. One neighbor covered his mouth. Another whispered, "Oh my God." Karen stood, shouting that it was fake, but no one listened because the truth was right there. Raw, undeniable. For the first time, Karen's power cracked. The board shifted uncomfortably. One of them asked if the footage could be verified. Another said, "This is serious. We can't ignore it." Karen screamed louder, her voice echoing against the clubhouse walls, but the more she shouted, the smaller she looked. And in that moment, I realized something. The HOA wasn't just Karen. It was all the neighbors who let her rule, who stayed quiet. Who paid the fines in silence. If they saw the truth, maybe, just maybe, they would finally stand up. The meeting ended in chaos. The board promised to review the evidence. Neighbors crowded me afterward, some whispering thanks, others asking for copies. Karen stormed out, her heels cracking against the tile like gunshots. But even as I stood there, holding my daughter close, I knew this wasn't finished. Karen wouldn't give up her crown so easily, and the more cornered she felt, the more dangerous she would become. That night, I couldn't sleep. I watched the recordings again. Again. Every word, every glare, every threat. It played in my head like a broken record, and I asked myself, what was next? Would she try to sue me, frame me, hurt me, or worse, hurt my daughter? I stared out the window at the quiet street, the perfect lawns, the perfect mailboxes, the perfect lie. And I whispered to myself, this neighborhood will never be the same. But here's where I want to pull you in. If you were me, standing in front of a board filled with your neighbors, holding proof that the HOA president wanted cops to shoot you, would you share it publicly like I did? Or would you keep it hidden to protect yourself and your family? The meeting ended, but the silence that followed was worse than the shouting. Neighbors shuffled out of the clubhouse, their eyes darting between me and Karen. Some looked at me with quiet support, others with fear. But everyone knew one thing. The neighborhood would never feel the same again. I walked home that night holding my daughter's hand. She asked me softly, "Daddy, is it over now?" I wanted to tell her yes. I wanted to promise her peace. But deep down, I knew the truth. Karen wasn't finished, because people like her, they don't lose gracefully. They don't step aside quietly. They strike back harder. The very next morning, it began. My mailbox was stuffed full of new letters, violation notices. One for having a lawn chair visible on my porch, one for leaving a garden hose unrolled, one for a noise complaint about my air conditioner. Each letter colder than the last, each signed by Karen herself. It was ridiculous. It was harassment dressed as paperwork. But she wasn't just trying to find me, she was trying to break me. I stood there holding the stack of letters, my hands trembling with anger. My daughter watched from the doorway. She whispered, "She won't stop, will she?" And I shook my head. No, she won't. That week turned into a storm of pettiness. Karen walked past our house 3 times a day, phone in her hand, snapping pictures. At night I could see her silhouette under the street lamp, writing in her little notebook. Once, at 2 a.m., I caught her shining a flashlight on my garage door, taking pictures like some kind of private investigator. Neighbors noticed too. Some began avoiding me, crossing the street rather than waving. Others slipped me notes of encouragement. "Stay strong. We're with you." But no one dared say it out loud because everyone feared her. And then came the letters from the HOA lawyer, notices of hearings, threats of liens, warnings of possible eviction. It felt like drowning in paper. Every day another envelope, every envelope another attack. But what Karen didn't understand was that I wasn't fighting alone anymore, because the moment I showed those recordings, something had shifted. Some neighbors who had been silent started reaching out. One old man down the street told me how she fined him $200 for a shade of beige that wasn't HOA approved. A single mom whispered that Karen threatened to report her to child services because her kids left toys in the yard, and another neighbor confessed that Karen had screamed at him for leaving Christmas lights up too. Days past the deadline, I realized something powerful. Karen wasn't just my enemy, she was everyone's enemy. They were just too afraid to say it. I started gathering their stories. I collected their letters, their notes, their photos, one by one. People began trusting me with their secrets. It was like peeling back wallpaper to find mold underneath. Every layer revealed more rot. I built a file so thick it barely fit in a drawer. Dozens of violations, threats, recordings, all showing one thing, that Karen wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was terrorizing it. But the more evidence I gathered, the more dangerous Karen became. She must have sensed something, because her tactics grew darker. One night, as I walked to my car, I found my tires slashed. Another morning, my trash bin was knocked over and smeared with paint, and one afternoon, I discovered dead flowers in my garden, ripped out at the roots, petty, cruel, unmistakable. I reported it to the police, but without proof they shrugged. Could be kids, could be anyone. But I knew, and Karen knew I knew. She would smile when she passed my house, that smug, cold smile, like she was daring me to accuse her. The breaking point came at another HOA meeting. This time, Karen walked in carrying a binder the size of a brick. She slammed it on the table and announced to the room, "This homeowner is destroying our community." She flipped through pages, pulling out photos of my house, a lawn chair left on the porch, a hose left unrolled, a chalk drawing my daughter made again. Every page another crime. The board sat stiff, the neighbors silent. I stood up, calm but shaking inside. I told them about the vandalism, the harassment, the fear. I reminded them of the recordings, the night she screamed, "Take the shot." And then I pulled out my own binder, thicker than hers, heavier than hers. Inside was every neighbor's story, every fine, every threat, every yes. I laid it on the table, and for the first time, the board didn't look at me, they looked at her. Karen laughed nervously, said it was all lies, said people were jealous of her leadership. But her voice cracked, her mask slipped. And the neighbors, they saw it. One woman stood up and said, "She fined me $100 for having my blinds half open." Another man shouted, "She tried to ban my dog because it barked once." Voices rose from every corner, years of fear spilling out all at once. Karen tried to shout over them, but the noise swallowed her, her power slipping like sand through her fingers. The board finally spoke. They said they would review everything, that an investigation would be launched, and Karen's face twisted. Pale and furious, she stormed out again, heels cracking against the floor. But this time, the whispers that followed weren't about me, they were about her. That night I felt hope for the first time. I looked at my daughter and said, "Maybe it's finally ending." But she looked at me with those big eyes and whispered, "Daddy, what if she gets revenge?" And my stomach turned, because I knew she was right. Karen wasn't done, not even close. The next week, strange things started happening. My internet cut out for hours at a time. Packages went missing from my porch. Letters I mailed never reached their destination. I knew it wasn't coincidence. Karen was pushing back, in ways harder to trace. And then came the final straw, a certified letter from the HOA, signed by Karen herself, declaring that my house was now under review for community safety violations. The letter said my property could be seized if I was found to be a danger to neighborhood harmony. It was insane, it was illegal, but it was also terrifying, because if the board sided with her, I could lose everything. I stared at that certified letter for a long time. The words, "Seize your property," burned in my head. It wasn't just about fines anymore. It was about taking everything from me. I thought about my daughter sleeping upstairs, her drawings still taped on her wall, her little shoes by the door. And I felt rage I had never felt before. This wasn't just harassment now, this was war. The next morning I didn't hide. I walked straight to the clubhouse with my binder under my arm. Neighbors saw me. Some nodded, some looked away, but I could feel their eyes following me. Inside, the board was sitting stiff. Karen sat at the head of the table like a queen in her throne, that same cold smile on her face. She slid another stack of papers across the table toward me. "Your violations," she said, her voice sharp, smug, full of venom. I didn't touch the papers. I didn't even look at them. Instead, I opened my binder and dropped dozens of photos on the table, photos of vandalism, letters of harassment, recordings of her threats. The room went silent. Then, I played the clip again, the one where she told the cops, "Take the shot." The sound echoed against the clubhouse walls. Neighbors gasped. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Karen jumped to her feet. "He's editing that. It's fake." But the timestamps glowed clear on the screen, and everyone knew the truth. That moment, something changed in the air, for months, even years. She had controlled everyone with fear, but now, her mask was slipping, and the neighbors, they saw it. One old man stood up, his hands shaking. "She fined me $500 because my driveway had a crack." A young mom spoke next. "She threatened me with child services because my kids left bikes outside." Voices grew louder, one after another. Story after story, years of fear pouring out like a flood. And suddenly, Karen wasn't the queen anymore. She was the villain standing alone in the middle of the room. But villains don't go down easy. Karen pointed her finger at me. "He started this. He's poisoning all of you. He wants to destroy this neighborhood." Her voice cracked, her face red. But she kept shouting. The board finally raised a hand. "We will review the evidence." That was all they said. But it was enough, because for the first time, the board wasn't protecting her. They were protecting themselves. Karen stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. But I knew she wouldn't stop there. That night, I made a decision. If Karen wanted a war, she would get one. But this time, I wasn't fighting alone. I knocked on doors. I talked to neighbors, one by one. They started opening up. They told me about fines, threats, humiliations. I listened. I wrote it all down. I added it to the binder. Soon, my binder wasn't just mine anymore. It was the neighborhood's binder. A book of secrets. A book of scars. Every page another wound Karen had caused. Word spread fast. Neighbors who had once avoided me started waving. Some even came over at night to talk. They whispered in my kitchen, drank coffee at my table, sharing stories they had never dared speak before. A retired veteran told me how she demanded he remove his flagpole because it was too tall. A teacher confessed she cried after Karen sent her a letter saying her front garden was a disgrace. Even the quiet house at the end of the street, the one no one talked to, opened its door. Inside was an elderly couple, shaking as they handed me a stack of fines that nearly ruined them financially. And I realized something chilling. Karen wasn't just cruel, she was methodical. She had been feeding off fear for years. I started to organize. I scanned the letters, made digital copies. I clipped the videos, added captions. I built a file so strong, so undeniable, that even a lawyer couldn't ignore it. I began sending quiet emails to the board. Not threats, not demands, just facts, clean, organized, undeniable facts. And slowly, I saw the cracks forming. Board members stopped smiling at Karen. Some avoided her entirely, and whispers began floating in the neighborhood, whispers of change. But Karen wasn't blind. She saw it happening. She could feel her grip slipping, and like any cornered predator, she lashed out harder. One night, as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something strange. My garage door was wide open. Then, I knew I had closed it that morning. I stepped inside carefully, heart pounding. Nothing was stolen, but everything was moved. Tools shifted, boxes opened, drawers left hanging. It wasn't a robbery, it was a message. The next day I found another note in my mailbox. No official letterhead, no fine, just one line scribbled in red ink. "You don't belong here." My hands shook as I held it. My daughter asked what it said. I folded it quickly and told her it was nothing. But inside, I knew it was everything. Karen was telling me she wouldn't stop until I left. But leaving wasn't an option anymore, because this wasn't just about me. It was about everyone she had hurt. And if I walked away now, she would win. She would keep ruling. and the neighbors would sink back into silence. So I doubled down. I printed flyers, anonymous at first. Has Karen fined you unfairly? Contact me. I slipped them under doors, left them at coffee shops, tucked them into mailboxes, and the calls started coming. Voicemails from people across the neighborhood, across town even. Stories of Karen's past neighborhoods. She had done this before. She had moved, joined HOAs, climbed to the top, and ruled with fear, leaving behind trails of angry families wherever she went. This wasn't just about one board. This was a pattern, a career of cruelty. The file grew thicker, the binder heavier, and I knew the time was coming, the time to take it beyond the clubhouse, beyond the cul-de-sac, to expose her where she couldn't hide. I stayed up late at night editing videos, every clip cut clean, every threat matched with a timestamp. I pieced together the story like a puzzle, and when I finished, I had a video, 20 minutes long, titled simply, "The Truth About HOA Karen." But before I hit upload, I sat back in my chair. My daughter peeked into the room, eyes wide with worry. "Daddy, will this make her go away?" she asked. I hesitated, because the truth, I didn't know. Exposing Karen could save us, or it could make her more dangerous, and that's where I want you to step in. If you had the power to expose someone who terrorized your neighborhood for years, would you risk everything by putting it online? Or would you keep it quiet to protect your family? I sat in front of the computer, finger hovering over the mouse. The video was ready. 20 minutes of truth, raw and undeniable. Karen's voice, her threats, her orders to the police. Take the shot. Every clip, every timestamp, every fine, it was all there. But hitting upload felt like pulling a trigger. Once I did it, there was no going back. I thought about my daughter asleep upstairs. I thought about the neighbors who trusted me with their stories. And I thought about Karen, pacing in her perfect house, waiting for me to break. I whispered to myself, "It's time." And I clicked upload. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages, calls, notifications. The video spread faster than I imagined. First the neighborhood, then the whole town, then beyond. People watched it in shock. Comments poured in. "Who does she think she is? This is insane. She should be arrested." Typical HOA dictator. Within hours, the video had thousands of views. By nightfall, it had tens of thousands, and the name HOA Karen became a storm. Neighbors who once stayed silent now stood taller. Some walked by my house just to thank me. Others left notes on my porch. Words of support. Words of courage. Even strangers emailed me, sharing their own HOA horror stories. It was bigger than just one neighborhood now. It was a movement. But Karen, she wasn't going to fade quietly. She came storming down the street the very next day, her face red, her hands waving wildly. "You'll pay for this," she screamed. "You slandered me. You'll regret it." I stood on my lawn, calm and steady. My daughter watched from the porch, her eyes wide but unafraid, because this time, we weren't alone. Half a dozen neighbors stood outside too, watching her, recording her. And Karen realized the spotlight wasn't on me anymore. It was on her. The HOA board panicked. They called an emergency meeting. The clubhouse was packed tighter than ever. Reporters even showed up, cameras flashing. The story had leaked beyond our small street. People wanted to see the infamous HOA president in action. Karen walked in like a storm, binder in her arms, rage in her eyes. She slammed it down on the table. "This is all lies," she shouted. "He's edited everything. He's destroying this neighborhood." But the board didn't back her up this time. They sat pale, silent, avoiding her gaze, because they had seen the video too, and they knew the world had seen it as well. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I simply held up the binder. I laid out the letters, the photos, the stories. Neighbor after neighbor stood up beside me. The old veteran, the single mom, the elderly couple, each telling their truth, each voice stronger than the last. Karen tried to shout them down, but the more she screamed, the smaller she looked, and then the board president finally spoke. "Karen, you're suspended until further notice." The room erupted in gasps. Karen froze, her eyes wide. Suspended. The one word she never expected. But suspension wasn't enough for her. She stormed out of the meeting, swearing she would sue everyone in the room. And that's when the real last stand began, because the next week, envelopes arrived again. Not HOA letters this time, but legal papers. Karen was suing me for defamation. She wanted damages, money, silence. She thought the law could silence the truth. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the papers. My daughter sat across from me coloring. She looked up and asked, "Daddy, are we going to lose the house?" I swallowed hard, because I didn't know the answer. But then something amazing happened. The neighbors rallied. They started a fund to help with legs. Al costs, they offered to testify. They shared the video even more, pushing it into new corners of the internet. And suddenly, I wasn't just one man against Karen. I was part of a community that finally woke up. The court case dragged on for months. Karen came in with her lawyers. Polished and loud, she called me a liar, an editor, a fraud. But every time she spoke, I played another clip. Every time she accused me, another neighbor testified, the veteran, the mom, the elderly couple, each telling their story under oath. And slowly, the judge saw it too. Karen wasn't the victim. She was the predator. The verdict came down on a rainy Tuesday. The judge ruled against Karen. Her lawsuit dismissed, her actions called malicious harassment in the court record, and in that moment, she lost everything. Her power, her title, her reputation. Neighbors cheered quietly, hugging one another. My daughter held my hand tight, smiling for the first time in months. And I felt a weight lift from my chest. But Karen, she wasn't finished. Even after the ruling, she lingered in the neighborhood. She walked slower now, her shoulders hunched, but her eyes still burning with hate. She knew she had lost, but she also knew she would never forgive. And I wondered, would she finally move away, or would she stay, waiting for another chance to strike? The board called one final meeting, this time, not about me, but about her. The clubhouse was packed again, every seat filled, every neighbor present. The board chair cleared his throat. After review of the evidence, and in light of the court's ruling, we are voting to remove Karen from the HOA board permanently. The vote was quick, unanimous, and just like that, the queen was dethroned. But as she stood to leave, Karen turned one last time, her voice low, sharp, like a blade cutting through the silence. "You think you've won," she said, "but this neighborhood will rot without me." And then she walked out, her heels echoing down the hall, the last sound we ever heard from her. That night, the street was quiet again. No flashlights in my yard, no letters in my mailbox. For the first time, peace felt real. I sat on the porch with my daughter, sipping lemonade, watching the sunset, and I thought about how far we had come, from chalk flowers, to lawsuits, to freedom. But I also thought about Karen's last words. Would the neighborhood rot without her? Or would it finally bloom without fear? And that's where I'll leave you with this question. If someone like Karen ruled your neighborhood, and you finally took them down, would you celebrate the victory and move on? Or would you always look over your shoulder, waiting for their return? The night after Karen was removed, the cul-de-sac felt different. No notes stuffed in mailboxes, no flashlights creeping across lawns, no heels clicking down sidewalks. For the first time in months, maybe years, there was peace. I sat on the porch with my daughter. She laughed as fireflies blinked in the yard. Her voice was lighter now, free. And I thought to myself, maybe the nightmare was finally over. But peace is never perfect. Not in this neighborhood. The board moved quickly after Karen's fall. They held elections, called it a fresh start. New faces appeared at the clubhouse. Neighbors who had once stayed silent now stepped forward. The single mom, the retired veteran, the quiet couple at the end of the street. They promised transparency. They promised fairness. And for a moment, it felt like hope. But scars don't fade overnight, because the truth was, we had all been living under Karen's shadow for too long. At first, neighbors smiled more. Lawns grew a little less perfect. Kids played louder in the streets. Porch lights flickered later into the night. It felt human again, messy, real, alive. But then, the whispers started, small at first, barely noticeable. Do you think the new board will be any different? Rules are rules. What if it all comes back? Without Karen, maybe it'll fall apart. The whispers grew, because fear doesn't vanish just because the monster is gone. It lingers, like smoke after a fire. One afternoon, I found a note in my mailbox, not from Karen, but from the board. It was a reminder about lawn maintenance, polite, friendly, almost harmless. But my chest tightened as I read it. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like history was repeating itself. My daughter noticed my face. "Is it happening again?" she whispered, and I shook my head quickly. No, not like before. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure. The new board tried hard. They invited neighbors to potlucks. They asked for input. They shared updates openly. But some people had grown used to fear. They watched every decision suspiciously, every letter, every rule, every reminder. It was like living with a ghost, the ghost of Karen. Even when she wasn't there, she was everywhere, in the cracks of conversations, in the sideways glances, in the silence that fell when someone mentioned her name. One evening, I saw her house, lights off, blinds shut tight. She hadn't moved yet. Her car sat in the driveway. But she didn't show her face. It was like she was haunting us from behind those walls. And I wondered, was she waiting? Waiting for a mistake? Waiting for the chance to come back? The thought kept me up at night. I lay awake listening to the hum of the air conditioner, the rustle of leaves outside. Half expecting to hear her heels again on the pavement, the neighbors leaned on me more now. Some saw me as a hero, others as a target. They asked me to keep my cameras rolling, to keep my binder ready, to keep watching, because even though Karen was gone, they still didn't feel safe. It was strange. I had started as just a homeowner trying to live quietly. Now I was the neighborhood's watchdog, the one they turned to when fear rose again. I didn't ask for it, but I couldn't turn away either, because I knew the fight wasn't over. One night, at a new board meeting, the single mom stood to speak. She looked around nervously and said, "We have to be careful. Karen still owns her house. She could run again in the future." The room grew tense. No one wanted to admit it, but we all thought the same thing. What if she came back? The veteran stood and slammed his cane on the floor. "Not if we stand together," he said. And for a moment, the room felt strong, but underneath, the fear still hummed. Weeks passed. The neighborhood looked calmer, happier. Kids drew chalk flowers on sidewalks again. Flags waved freely on porches. Even garden gnomes appeared, little rebellions of color and joy, but every act of freedom carried a shadow of doubt. Would Karen appear out of the dark? Would she scream again about aesthetics and community harmony? Would she try to rebuild her crown? I kept recording, every night. My cameras blinked red in the dark because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still coming. And then, it did. One evening, a white envelope appeared in my mailbox. No HOA logo, no stamp, just slid inside quietly. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no signature, no date, just one sentence. "I'm still here." My heart stopped. My hands went cold. I looked around the street, but it was quiet, too quiet. I showed it to the board. They frowned, nodded, said they would look into it. But I knew Karen was reminding me, reminding all of us, that she hadn't truly left. That night I sat with my daughter on the porch. The air was heavy, the crickets loud, the streetlights humming. She leaned against me and whispered, "Daddy, is she coming back?" And I didn't have an answer, because the truth is, even when you win against someone like Karen, you never really win. You just wait. Wait for the next move. Wait for the next battle. And now, I want to pull you into this moment with me. If your worst enemy was defeated, but still lived right down the street, would you sleep peacefully at night? Or would you always look over your shoulder, waiting for the sound of their footsteps? The envelope with those 3 words, "I'm still here," sat heavy on my desk. I read it again and again, as if the letters would change. But they didn't. The message was simple. Karen was not finished. For weeks, nothing else happened. No new finds, no new notes, no shouting on the street. But the silence was worse than the noise, because silence means waiting. And waiting is its own kind of torture. Neighbors started to relax again. Kids played late into the evening. Sprinklers hissed across lawns. Porch lights glowed soft, but I couldn't relax. Every car that slowed near her house made me tense. Every creak at night made me check the cameras. I lived in peace, but I never felt peace. Then, one night, my camera caught something. At 3:17 a.m., a figure stood on the sidewalk across from my house, still, motionless, watching. I zoomed in on the recording, blonde hair pulled tight, arms folded, face half in shadow. Karen. She didn't move for nearly 10 minutes, just stood there, watching my house, then turned and disappeared into the night. The next morning I told the board. They nodded, frowned, made notes, but they looked tired, afraid, like they wanted it all to go away, like they didn't want to fight her again. The truth was, even without power, Karen still controlled us. Her presence was enough. Her silence was enough. Her shadow was enough. Then came the rumor that Karen was planning a comeback, that she was speaking to neighbors quietly, trying to rebuild support, that she promised revenge if she ever got back on the board. Some neighbors laughed it off, others grew nervous, and me. I prepared. I pulled together every file, every clip, every testimony, and I stored it safely, in places she couldn't reach, because if she wanted another war, I would be ready. But the twist came from somewhere else, not from Karen directly, but from her house. One evening, flashing lights filled the cul-de-sac again. Police cars lined the street. Neighbors stepped outside, whispering. And I saw Karen being led out of her house in handcuffs. My jaw dropped. I asked an officer quietly what happened. He shook his head but whispered just enough. Fraud charges, misuse of HOA funds. Fraud. All this time she screamed about community rules, fines, order. And she was stealing from the very people she ruled. The news spread fast. Neighbors who once feared her now cursed her name. Some cheered, some shook their heads in disbelief. The queen had fallen, not just from power, but into disgrace. Her house sat empty for weeks after, blinds closed, grass uncut, mail piling up, the perfect image she built. Now crumbling. I thought it was finally over, but it wasn't. One evening, months later, I came home to find a package on my porch. No label, no return address. I carried it inside slowly. Heart pounding. Inside was a small black notebook, worn, weathered, filled with handwriting. It was Karen's notebook, pages of notes about neighbors, dates, times, photos taped inside, every fine she gave, every threat she made, every personal detail she collected. It was chilling, like stepping into her mind. On the very last page, there was a message written in bold red ink. You may think you won, but I never lose. I don't know who left that notebook. Maybe the police, maybe a neighbor who found it, or maybe Karen herself. One last reminder that her shadow would never leave this street. I locked the notebook away, but I never stopped thinking about that last line. I never lose. Because even though she was gone, her presence lingered, in our fear, in our stories, in our silence. Now, the neighborhood is calmer, the board is fairer, the lawns are greener in a messy human way. My daughter draws chalk flowers again without fear, and I smile when I see them. But every time I walk past Karen's empty house, I glance at the windows, half expecting to see her face. Watching, waiting. Because people like Karen, they don't vanish. They live in the corners of our memory. They become the story we tell to remind ourselves what power can do, what fear can do, what one person can do to an entire community. And that brings me to you. Watching this story unfold, if you lived in this neighborhood, and Karen's empty house stood across from yours, would you believe it was truly over? Or would you keep checking the window at night, waiting for her shadow to return? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes the scariest villains aren't the ones who stay, they're the ones who leave, but never let you forget them.